Hi everybody, this is Sean Kapul back finally with a second video here at PokerVIP. This time coming to you from rainy Rio de Janeiro, where I played a pretty interesting session recently, two-tabling some 2-5 Zoom on Pokerstars, and thought there were some pretty interesting spots to go over, and we can do that right now by hopping into some footage. Alright, I'm going to start this session up and see what kind of hands we get into. Both these hands are going to be very clear defends, assuming there are no 3-bets placed. The hand on the left, even though it looks kind of good and connected, even before the 3-bet would have been a fold in the small blind. It's just a hand that's going to end up it's too low of a rundown to really profitably be playing it out of position against what should be a very strong under the gun opening range there. This hand on the left, I guess I considered ISO 3-betting what I have tagged as a weaker player, but this is a hand that kind of plays fine multi-way. It's not a great hand in 3-bet pots, but can certainly hold its own, especially playing in position on the button. Flop on the left-hand side, okay. It's not a spot you want to be like jamming money into the pot, but it's definitely a hand that I want to get value from at this point. Check two by 2 players. My hand needs quite a bit of protection as well from random ace-x, some straight draws, some pair plus gut shot type hands, which should be continuing. And we're perfectly happy to get it in versus Happiness short stack in this spot. On the right-hand side, this is a hand that, with just the ace-10, I would very often check back, but I see that with the intention of barreling, holding the ace of clubs, so I'll turn my hand into a bluff very, very often in this spot, depending on turn and river runouts. But get check raised by Dovemont and just need to fold our hand without any sort of serious backup besides just a nut flush blocker. It's a hand I would be continuing with if I held any sort of flush draw, but I think it's a bit ambitious to be calling with the intention of bluffing with just a blocker down the road. Which I think a lot of people get wrong. They kind of will be calling hands that they think have a bunch of bluff equity, but fail to calculate the price they'll be laying their opponents on future streets. So that's something you guys should really be considering when lining up certain bluffs. Like, how does this, am I laying this person the incorrect price to be bluff catching, basically? Whereas if you're calling a turn check raise, for example, and will be, let's say you're in position, you call a turn check raise, but only have about a half pot size shove left on the river, and you're calling with, let's say, like a decent draw, but then also some like flush blockers that you can then bluff on the river, it's still not a good spot to, like, your bluff equity, while you think you have some, it's kind of like a reverse implied bluff equity almost in a way, where you're going to be bluffing but never getting that, you're not never, but you're not going to get enough folds often enough because your stacked pot ratio is laying your opponent too good of a price on a call, basically. Here on the right-hand side, we have a pair and a gut shot, but at a pretty severe range disadvantage, and couldn't really stand a check raise, but can continue on quite a few turns there. But the king is not one of them. We just need to lay our hand down. Not great queens on the right-hand side, but suited and in the cutoff is just good enough. But not good enough to be calling 3-bets out of position. We're just not going to be able to realize our equity with this hand. And it's just flops very poorly and does very poorly even against a normal size 3-betting range. But this player looks particularly tight with only a 4% 3-bet right here. I hope I folded. Okay, good. A pretty looking hand in the left table. And on the right hand side I have a very standard defend. The hand on the left, while it looks very pretty, it's not pushing a ton of equity against a relatively tight cutoff player, and I don't have any reads or stats on the player on the button, but it's a hand that plays perfectly fine multi-way, even out of position. Now, though, this would be a super standard call of the 3-bet, but given that the button player is now reshoved, and his reshove is larger than the 3-bet made, we're now facing a spot where if we call now, IA Kevin in the big blind can 5-bet shove all in, and that isn't a spot we really want to be getting into because so many of our cards aren't clean, like our outs won't be clean. Very often, Zia Pilo and IA Kevin will be holding big cards. Sometimes they both have aces, but even if they do, very often they'll have a 10 or a queen or a king or some flush draw covering ours. And the equity of this hand just goes down dramatically. It'd be far better to have a lower rundown in this spot than this particular hand. And so given that, we need to just give our hand up in this spot. Thought about it for a while, I think, but ended up letting it go. On the right-hand side, sorry, I believe we just let out the flop here against a regular player. It's not a 7 that's strong enough to check raise, and I think multi-way on the flop, it's going to get checked through pretty often. So this is kind of a good hand to be leading, as well as us having a range advantage is going to lower this player's c-bet frequencies. Get called again on the turn, and now it's just a question of sizing. Do we want to kind of go very big and make it look like a boat or withdraw, or are we going kind of thinner for value? And I opt to go quite small, with about a 1/3 pot size bet. It actually served as a blocking bet in that spot, which was pretty handy. But I think if it was a little more dynamic a board, at least on the flop, I would probably size larger, not with that particular 7x, but if I had ace 7 or king 7 or better, I think that's a good spot to be polarizing your bet size and making it bigger. Especially against players who have any sort of decent win to showdown stat number there. On the right-hand side, we limp call, which is something I'm going to do with quite a lot of hands, and I think a lot of regulars are starting to do that a lot because nobody folds their big blind to small blind steal these days. And that hand is certainly fine to do it with. It's not a very strong hand, but it's ace high with a suit. We face a 3-bet from the small blind on the right-hand table, and this would be a spot I would be calling at full stacks, but I actually haven't reloaded here, but he's even shorter than we are at this moment, and this just would be a very unprofitable call at such shallow stacks. And kind of the reason the call would be unprofitable is mostly because we're just unable to profitably call it off on most flops. Like, unless we flop a set or gut shot or flush draw or better, we're just calling pre with a pretty significant amount of our stack, or effective stack at least, in that spot, only to fold the flop. Here with 30 big blinds effectively on this flop, it's one I wouldn't be thrilled about bet getting it in, but just kind of too short to not. When the big blind leads here, though, especially because we do hold the ace of diamonds, he doesn't have the nut flush draw, obviously. And so with that hand combo discounted from his range there, or removed completely from his range, I should say, I think we just need to let our hand go there. But certainly pushing equity against a button's flat calling range on a board like that. And after we bet, if we were to get check raised by the big blind, we would begrudgingly have to get it in because he's shoving any two pair, any flush draw, along with, of course, his stuff that totally crushes us. But at such shallow depths, it's just a hand we would have to be getting it in there, if we were the ones placing a c-bet. We flatten the small blind here on the left. Consider taking a stab on the turn against this player, who's pretty solid. I do hold a lot of like ace, king, ace, queen type stuff when I flat in the small blind against a hijack open. But, well, but this player is pretty balanced and one that's not over c-betting, and so I think he is checking back a lot of decent ace-x hands in that spot. And so elected not to bet that turn, but against some players who are a little less balanced, I would definitely be looking to attack after they check back a board like that. Here on the right-hand side, pretty standard open on the button. Not a standard c-bet, but holding the queen of hearts. I think it's just on the cusp there of having, I mean, that's a pretty significant blocker. That or the 10 of hearts are about as good as you can get in that spot. And so it's one of those spots where, again, a kind of shorter stack, we can c-bet there and then have a lot of profitable turn bluff cards as well. But fortunately, just take it down on the flop, which obviously very happy with. Another hand on the right-hand side that we will be playing, assuming we don't face a 3-bet from Dovmont. Even though we are shallow here, we're getting an amazing price with a hand that flops. Flops are very easy to play at this stack depth with a hand like this. So you either flop a draw and get it in, or flop 2 pair and check raise or check shove, or check raise or just lead and get it in. But decided to reload here just because I think playing full stacks will be more interesting for you guys to see. If I weren't recording this, I would just play through this stack because there is an inherent advantage to be playing shorter when everyone else is full stack or close to full. That's kind of a topic for a different time, I guess. Here again on the right hand side, we limp with a hand that is pretty good, right? Double suited, not very high up, but certainly a playable hand, but not one I necessarily want to be playing a 3-bet pot with. On the left-hand side, we check back a pretty dynamic board. check back again on the turn. I might decide to, I might be bluffing here if we get check to again on the river, because I will take this line with a lot of medium flush hands. Basically because you're not getting 2 streets or more of value with a hand like that, and so you can protect your flop and turn check back range by checking back a jack high flush, for example, in that spot. On the right hand table, obviously no more real value. You can make an argument for betting the turn for protection, but it's very thin doing that. Two clear folds over there. And more folds. And so I guess there's a bit of a pause here. I want to mention I do have a website up right now called plomastery.com. And if you guys want to check that out to kind of further your PLO learning and knowledge, I have a few free videos up over there that you can get. They're basically videos pointing out common leaks that a lot of mostly no-limit players make in their transition to PLO or when they're looking to transition, that if you're in that spot can kind of help you out. And even if you're already kind of been playing PLO for a while, I think you'll get some value from those videos as well. So if that's of interest, go ahead and check that out. So the hand on the left is kind of stronger up in our range, small blind versus big blind. It's a hand I will open. It's also fine as a limp call as well. I would be limp calling it if someone's like incredibly 3-bet happy, blind versus blind. This is a hand I would be limp calling with. 3-bet the pretty decent suited kings versus the cutoff open. Obviously, this is a board not very good for our range, and I'll be checking the majority of my hands in this spot. It kind of sucks not having a backdoor flush draw there, but we do have a backdoor straight draw. And we turn a gut shot, and after he checks back the flop, I think we want to be betting at this point for value. I think we have the best hand pretty much always, unless he has some combo of 9-5. Other 2-pair combos aren't really going to make up his cutoff opening range here. Even 5-9 is really pushing it. River 10, I don't think we're getting any more value on this board, and probably just looking to bluff catch would be weird. It'd be very strange for him to show up with a total air ball in this river. So I'm not really expecting a bet. If we do face a bet, yeah, it's just so hard to see what he could... I mean, turning jacks into a bluff would seem kind of strange, given his showdown value. So, I think if we did face a bet there, I think it would be a tough fold, but a good one. I just think he's got 9-10s too much in that spot if we do face a bet. It's one of those spots where, because given how the hand played out, he almost never shows up on the river with a bluff, that if he somehow decides to turn 9x or jacks or something like that into a bluff, I think we just need to let that one go. He's just going to have 9-10 way too often, I think, when we're facing a bet there. Hand here on the right is just around the borderline for a cutoff open, assuming the hijack here folds. The 6 definitely drops the value of this hand somewhat considerably, but it's a little connected to the 10. So 7, 8, 9, I mean, it would make us the nut straight as well, but if the queen and jack were, let's say, a king queen instead, the 6 becomes somewhat more relevant in that spot. Here, pretty easy. You button open. And no suit, but decently connected jacks in the cutoff should be an open. And I guess this is a good spot to make a point that when you are playing more shallow, these kinds of hands become more valuable. So like the hands with kind of raw equity advantages that aren't necessarily super playable post-flop. So things like unsuited queens and ace, something like ace, queen, 10, 5 suited to a 10 or a queen instead of the ace are still strong hands because just the raw top rank percentile on those hands is still high. And so the shallower you get, the more you want to be opening hands like that and dropping hands from your opening range that are kind of like the lower sexy rundown type hands. On the left-hand side, I decided to make a bluff raise with not much. Blockers to aces and kings and holding a9. But it's a board that I think some players will tend to over c-bet, and that was my main reasoning for making this raise. On the turn, we have a pretty decent spot to be following up. And I say that because it's not a spot we need to be betting very large to get folds. He has some 7-6 in his range that's looking for a safe turn, but very few in his blind versus blind opening range. It's very often going to have some sort of like gut shot or 2 overcards to go with it that won't be super playable out of position on a lot of turns, that they'll just want to be jamming and getting it in there. So we follow up on the turn and get a fold, which is good, obviously. I wasn't tanking to wonder if I should open the aces on the left, if that's what you're wondering. I think I had one more table while recording this and probably was in a difficult spot over there. But yeah, this is a board look to c-bet, very often ahead, and want to get some value. Yeah, the hand on the right, it's just too weak to be opening even on the button 3, 4, 7, 8. Yeah, it's just a very bad hand. On the left-hand side, while I thought we were ahead and wanted to get value on the flop, facing a raise out of position changes that hypothesis, and so we're just going to fold that hand. The hand here, I think, not a huge sample on this player, but decided to 3-bet. It's definitely a strong hand. Not super strong, of course, but one, I kind of want to isolate what I have tagged as a weaker player. Especially if you know players are kind of opening lower rundowns from under the gun and the hijack. The hand like this is a good one to include in your 3-bet range against those players. The flop is obviously pretty bad for our actual hand and our range, but he checks to us twice now on the turn. And with us having an 8 of spades, I think it's kind of useful, or very useful, and so make a delayed c-bet. On the river, picking up a king, that brings in the flush. I'm just going to take my showdown value at this point, and shows us a set. Going to go ahead and cold 4-bet these suited bad aces. Want to lower the SPR as much as possible with a hand like this. And my 4-bet range here isn't obviously just aces, especially in this spot versus, I think this is a regular 3-betting the button against a weaker player, and his 3-bet range is going to be wider than normal, and so your 4-bet range here needs to be wider than normal, and so that'll be good ace-king suited, pretty good, decent kings, ace-queen-queen, I think is one I would have in my cold 4-bet range in this particular spot as well. So, yeah, when you have a regular on the button who is 3-betting wider to isolate weaker players, you need to be widening up your 4 range pretty significantly as well. You can even do it for, you probably want to do it less for deception in that spot and just do it with hands that are pushing equity edges in that spot. But against some players where it's a regular opening the cutoff and then a regular 3-betting the button, for example, you can once in a while 4-bet like double suited rundowns. Although I don't recommend it very often. Double suited hand on the right hand table, definitely an open on the button, king queen double suited. This is a spot that I think comes up in a lot of sessions where you flop okay with the flush draw, and this is certainly a hand you can bet or check back. You can basically be calling almost all turn bets if they delay c-bet. The problem with checking often is you turn your hand strength pretty face up, but you can also once in a while be checking trips in a spot like that, especially if they're kind of like weaker trips like 8-7-7, something like that. We make slightly loose-ish peel with just a straight draw on this flop on the left. We turn a set, and I think when we get checked to, also holding a 10, so we're blocking ace-10 and 9-10. I think we now often have the best hand and want to get some protection and value from king-queen and hearts. This is obviously a pretty nasty river for us, and if we get checked to, I actually don't even think we can get value in this spot. Yeah, I think it's a pretty nasty spot. We certainly have, well, I don't think this player is bluffing very often in this spot because we have a lot of king-queen and king-jack in our range. And so, again, like I guess I mentioned this earlier on in the recording, that when a player gets to the river in a situation like this where they have so few bluffs, it's kind of like a spot where if it's 90% value right now and 10% bluffs, they get to get away with those bluffs, right? And I actually think this situation is probably less than a 10% bluff from him, especially because we have a 10 of hearts. He just, king-queen is like the most obvious holding to me. And it's just, yeah, I mean, he's not turning 10-9 into a bluff the way he played it now. Certainly not ace-10. So, yeah, I mean, this hand from this player is going to kind of always be kings, king-queen, or queens, I guess, would also be taking this line. And I think we make a very good fold there. Yeah, I guess it's a concept that can be elaborated on, I guess, in a different time. This video's getting close to the end of its recording. But yeah, I guess I've mentioned it twice now in this video, but just to summarize and finish off that point, for you as well, when you get to a river spot where you kind of almost always are having value when you're betting, the few times you end up in that spot with the bluff, in your situation, you kind of are obligated almost to be bluffing. So in a spot like that, if, I don't know, if he somehow has Queen Jack 10-9, I guess, kind of the only thing I can consider, maybe he decides to turn into a bluff to get me off Ace 10 or something like that, or my jacks in that spot. It would be a good spot to do so. That said, I think in that particular spot, when you have 10-9, you're just going to oftentimes be checking, hoping to get to a showdown. Because, yeah, I guess if you do have 10-9 there and you're turning a hand that strong in that spot into a bluff, you're over bluffing in a spot like that. Pretty weird spot on the right-hand side. We get led into on the turn for full pot, holding 2 blockers, and after he check calls the flop, which is quite strange. But we put in a raise on the turn here and face a call. River is obviously bad for what we're representing, but we also are at the very bottom of our range. Like sometimes we win at showdown against like total miss, like Jack Queen King, no pair. But I think to maximize our fold equity and get 10x, 10 Jack Queen with hearts to fold and stuff like that, we just want to be betting on this river. And while we're representing a straight in this spot, it's also a board that we will have boats on quite a bit as well. So I don't think if you do have a straight in this spot, you don't need to necessarily be very scared of getting check shoved on as a bluff, or I guess check raised. We're a little too deep for check shove. But yeah, your range is still protected here by the fact that when you do have a straight in a spot like this, you are often going to have some boats, or at least blockers to boats. And so people aren't going to just think, oh, he's repping a straight, I don't have anything but a missed draw, but now he can't have a boat, and so I check raise. Some players might have that train of thought, that line of thought rather, but they're very few and far between. So I think you can safely be value betting a straight in a spot like this as well. I think we make a marginal flat on the button on the left versus an under the gun open. Yeah, especially with a shorter stack, this should just be a fold. But given that we're here on the flop, we have a combo draw and not really going anywhere with it. So, and he check raises us all in. Yeah, we're just going to be getting it in this spot. And getting lucky. So, getting to the end of this video right now. The hand here on the right is going to be the last one, I believe. I think we just c-bet here and take it down. But hopefully that was an interesting video for you guys. And you got a lot of interesting takeaways. There are a few spots that came up that maybe were a little eye-opening, or make you consider taking different lines in different spots, and just general things to consider. So, should be back hopefully soon with a follow-up to this one. And in the meantime, if you want to further your PLO knowledge and get your learn on, I guess, in a little more ways, head over to PLOmastery.com where you can get some free videos that I'm not sharing anywhere else. talk to you guys next time. This is Sean Kapul. Talk to you later. Bye.